Good afternoon. My name is Mark Agers, and I am the director of the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations here at Cal State San Bernardino. We serve children, parents, and families in the inland region through research, education, and applied services. It is my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Rudy Roy. Dr. Roy is an associate professor of child development and family studies in the Department of Family and Consumer Sciences at Cal State University, Long Beach. There, she teaches courses on on the transition to parenthood and family dynamics, family stress and coping, and also internships in child development and family life education. Her research centers around cultural influences on parental roles across the transition to parenthood and during early childhood. She also researches fatherhood engagement and multiracial families. She has co-authored a book on the transition to parenthood and most recently co-edited a book on biracial families. She is the co-founder of Promise, Promoting Healthy Multiracial Families Through Support and Education, and is a board member of the National Council on Family Relationships. And also, Dr. Roy is a certified family life educator who consults with community agencies serving culturally diverse families. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Roy with us today to share some of her research and some of her thoughts and ideas about families. And so with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Rudy Roy.
Thank you, Mark. It's my pleasure to be here today. Well, thank you all for joining me. Thank you for that introduction, Mark. I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to be presenting on one of my favorite topics, which is the transition to parenthood. I have actually been researching and teaching about the transition to parenthood for almost 2 decades now. And so I can't say enough about how much I enjoy this topic and meeting couples who are making this very important life transition together. So today I want to talk about strengthening our relationships across the transition to parenthood. And I'll be focusing, initially I'll talk a little bit about the transition, but I'll mainly be focusing on the 5 domains of relationships that really shift and change as individuals become parents. And then I'd also like to discuss 2 key factors that play a huge role in strengthening these relationships. But first, let me begin by talking a little bit about the transition to parenthood. So the transition to parenthood has actually been studied by scholars across multiple disciplines since the 1950s. And we see it as a time of crisis and distress for couples and parents, because there is the creation of new roles. There's a large number of responsibilities that fall on each individual parent. And although initially we looked at it as a crisis that the couple had to manage, or the individual had to manage, we now see it more as a normative crisis, one which creates some stress, but given the appropriate amount of resources and support, individuals and couples thrive. And we know from the research that the benefits of becoming a parent outweigh the costs. I mean, when you consider the fact that we're seeing couples have babies, lots and lots of babies every year, definitely the benefits of having children outweigh the costs. Now, not for all individuals. I mean, people, an increasing number of women are actually choosing not to have children, but generally speaking, for many couples, this transition is an important life decision that they make individually and as a couple. So the 5 domains of relationships that I'm going to focus on, what I want you to remember about these domains are that they're interrelated, such that when one relationship changes or adjusts, it impacts other relationships. And so when you think about this, I want you to remember that, oftentimes my students will say, I'm not marrying his mother, even though I really don't care that I don't get along with her, or a male student will say, I don't get along with her family, but I know that we'll be successful in our relationship. And that is great and positive. But the reality is, once couples become parents and have children, regardless of what that dynamic was like with their partner's family, those family members want to be involved with that child. And so it creates some shifts. And so just imagine that individual and that dyadic relationship between the couple then gets impacted by the external family across this transition, and how they connect as a couple impacts their family impacts how they'll connect as a couple. So really, I'm going to talk about these different domains of relationships, but they're really interrelated. And the other aspect of these relationships that I want you to keep in mind is that time is really a factor when we talk about these relationships. So the individual parent's age, the amount of time they've been together as a couple, their past experiences with their own families of origin, all these factors that are really about time also impact these domains of relationships. So with that said, let me get into talking about the first domain. And so the first domain is really about the self, the individual parent. And this domain really impacts the relationship that individual parent will have with the pregnancy, then the infant and toddler during those early years. So we know that gender and individual differences impact the experiences that new parents have. So when we look at gender, we know that, for example, females that are quite organized and tend to have things scheduled and prepared tend to do well across this transition. They seem to be planners. They seem to think ahead. We find that for males, for fathers who are very nurturing and emotionally connected, they also tend to do quite well across this transition. We also see individual differences. So if someone has self-confidence, they've been kind of socialized, they have brothers and sisters who've had children, they're prepared, they kind of know what to expect those first few months. They're going to have a little bit more preparedness. And what we've seen over the last couple of decades is a real shift in terms of fathers and how well they're being prepared to take on their role as caregivers and nurturing fathers. We also see some gender differences in the philosophical changes that occur. For women, we tend to see, and not for all women, but for some women who might be career oriented, really focused on establishing themselves, what might happen and what we've seen happen is that when they have a child, then they reprioritize, right? So they might not want to go into work as soon as they had originally planned. They might feel a lot of guilt about having to leave their new infant with a childcare provider when they have to leave. So we see real shifts philosophically for women, and men don't necessarily show those shifts initially. For men, it takes a little bit longer. And so we don't know if it's because women have spent so much time carrying the child. And so then when the child is born, that shift in their philosophy and their priorities takes effect right away. For some fathers, they'll talk about really feeling connected to their baby when they hear their not infant, but toddler saying, I love you, daddy, or that connection really grows for them, which is, generally a lot longer than in the initial connection that the mothers feel. And now this isn't for everybody. We're talking in general terms. And then I mentioned before the experience, right? So if the individual parents have a lot of experience with infants, have had their friends have these make this transition before they did. They're a little bit more prepared. Everything isn't as new to them and unexpected than someone who might be the first in their family to be having a grandchild, or the first of their friends to be having a child. So then the second domain of relationships is between the self and their partner. So this has really been the focus of most of the research on the transition to parenthood. And what we know is bringing a child home from the hospital increases the labor, not only the labor from each individual parent in terms of caring for this very dependent infant, but taking care of the dishes and the dirty bottles and the laundry, and just an increase in both childcare labor and household labor. Parents, their relationship shifts in that there's a lot less time. If you're in a relationship where each partner really appreciates their alone time or their time with friends, having to care for an infant, especially those first few months of life, really takes a toll on people in terms of their lack of sleep and the time that gets taken away from them. And we find that couples who are older, who have been together longer, can have difficulty in adjusting to this loss of time. But at the same time, older parents, chronologically older parents, tend to have additional resources that really help them kind of outsource some of the tasks. So then they gain some of that time back if they have those resources. So I'm talking about paying for someone to come clean the house, being able to pay for a sitter on a regular basis. And so these adjustments that every couple really goes through when they become parents can really create some distress for the couple. And what we've learned is that demonstrating appreciation and love and affection for your partner becomes quite important. So, when I talk about the relationship, when I talk about a couple's relationship across the transition to parenthood, I say, the 24 hours that you're in the presence of your infant seems like a really long time, and it's almost an emotional roller coaster, right? So just imagine you're getting up, you've had very little sleep, the baby's crying, you're going to the baby, your partner is right there, can't do something that you asked them, or is huffing and puffing. And in your head, you're thinking, oh my gosh, why am I having a child? Why did I have a child with this person? This is the worst situation. And, throughout the day, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, you say to yourself, I picked the wrong partner. Why didn't I, and you might think of your ex, or you might think of your friend's partner and how great they are. And then your partner turns around and says, you're doing a good job as a mom, or you're doing a really good job as a dad. And that completely changes your mindset and everything that's happened during the day, right? You completely forget that, because then you feel appreciated, right? And that is one piece that we've learned from couples, that, even when times are difficult, your partner recognizing what you do, not taking you for granted, appreciating all the time and effort and energy that you're putting into caring for your child, becomes such an important asset to your relationship. And really, when I talk about love and affection, couples need to recognize and understand each other's love languages. It's not the same for everyone. And so if you have a good foundation of understanding each other, being able to demonstrate that becomes really, really important as your relationship shifts across this life transition. So now we move outside of the couple's relationship and think about family and friends. The reality is that having a child creates a lot of need for support. Whether you have 2 parents in the picture or 1 parent, support beyond a partner is essential and important, because you can't put everything on your partner. especially in the long term. And so having those connections, we see some individual parents who might not have been close or connected to their families of origin will reach out to them for support, or their families will reach out to want to be involved in the child's life. And so those relationships then become important. We also find that for some couples, creating new peer relationships with other parents becomes important. These peer relationships are significant because they normalize what you're experiencing. You don't feel like you're the only one in this relationship where your partner is not doing A, B, and C. And you put a lot on your partner. And so to normalize that, you're not alone, these types of things happen, they do pass. It's about supporting each other and communicating. So the peer relationships with other parents becomes crucial and important. And then setting boundaries with friends and family members. Now, when I often talk about setting boundaries with family, people think, oh, you don't want a parent who maybe wasn't supportive of your relationship to now jump in and try to be super involved as a grandparent. Yes, that's part of it. You need to make sure that you and your partner are setting boundaries as you transition to make sure that everyone stays respectful, that your partner still feels like they have a voice in this situation. But also, we find that for some couples, if they're very close to their parents, for example, if a new mother is very close to her mom, that close relationship can then impede on her relationship with her partner, because now grandma wants to take on a lot and do a lot, and dad gets kind of pushed to the side, or the other partner gets pushed to the side. And so to make sure that you're setting boundaries so that each parent feels engaged and involved. Now, this lecture is obviously too short. This presentation is too short to talk about maternal gatekeeping, but that's definitely a factor when we see moms pushing dads away because they are so connected to their role as a new mom that they kind of want to take on everything, and that creates additional stress. But setting boundaries is really important, and I'll come back to that. Also, we see shifts in the relationship between the individual parent and their work and their communities, their neighborhood environments. For example, if you were the one who was the yes person at work, you took on tasks, you did a lot of things, we see a shift that once you have a child, you start to set more boundaries at work, to say no to things, to try to bring less things home. Just so that you can have that additional time with your child. What's interesting is that for fathers, we actually see an increase in the time they spend at work. And part of that is because they want to be able to provide financially more for their children. And so we see this kind of pull back from moms, but this increase in time at work from dads. And then we see a lot of additional strain on dads who say that, our society isn't built around involved fathers because men are expected to be providers more so than the nurturing parent. And so that's, another presentation in itself. But so we definitely see these shifts at work, and then your neighborhood environment, as couples come together, they often don't think about what is this community going to look like for us when we bring a child home. You might want to live in a place that's close to work, or that might have a great social scene for you. But then as couples become parents, they really start thinking about, where are the close parks? Where can we go for walks? What are the school districts going to start to look like? What are their rankings? And so really looking at community resources that are available, what kinds of support groups, what kinds of parent-child activities are around in your community. And so we see couples who can afford to do so relocating to more family-friendly communities. And so your neighborhood environment, again, shifts, and your relationship with that community changes. The last domain, which I think is a crucial and an important domain, is the relationship that you have with your own culture. Oftentimes we find that for a lot of particularly immigrant parents, they don't, they grow up in this kind of dual reality of, they have their family culture of origin, they've grown up in a society, they take on that society, and then they kind of assimilate to that society. And then when they have children, they kind of want to bring back some of their cultural values. And this is wonderful, but the lack of communication with their partner about those values then becomes problematic, right? And I could go on and on about cultural values and the impact that they have on your relationship once you shift. These conversations, that dialogue about your culture and your identity and who you are and how you want those values to impact your parenting, those conversations need to be shared with your partner before the transition, not to wait until you've had a child and then start talking about you don't want to give your child babies Tylenol because you don't believe in medicating a young child, or you want to make sure that your child stays away from these certain people or those certain people. I mean, so many things that impact the way that you want to parent, right? When it comes to your culture or the realities that you feel your child will experience. We see for multiracial families, a lot of these cultural discussions take place actually for couples as they're preparing to become parents, and they become crucial and important to the stability and support that partners can provide each other as they become parents. So, I've talked a lot about the shifts that occur in these relationships as couples become parents. And I kind of want to talk now about how do we best prepare for what's to come. Sorry, there we go. Okay. So the two key factors, and this probably isn't new, you've probably heard it before, but I really want to focus on factors that strengthen relationships. And the first is communication, and the second is expectations. We know from the very onset of research on the transition to parenthood that communication between partners is crucial and important, and a foundation for the success of their relationships. And I often have to tell couples that, your partner doesn't know what you're thinking. And what we tend to assume is, I've been with them for so long, they should know me, they should understand. And that is not the case, and that does not happen. And so we really always need to communicate verbally in terms of what our needs are, what our wants are. We need to be in a place with our partners, especially if we're planning to raise a child together, that we can communicate openly, openly in terms of respectfully, and also communicate often. If you find that you're in a relationship where you don't communicate until someone has, blows up, or something, happens, and then you're like, okay, now we have to come together and talk. You really need to rework that and rethink that. It's important that both partners are present when you're having this communication. And what I mean by present is that you're open and you're listening. Sometimes individuals will find that when something happens, they can't talk about it in the moment. They need to take a break, maybe go for a walk, maybe come back to a conversation. But it's important to have those conversations, because what we know is that infants can be impacted by couples' arguments. And research has actually demonstrated that by 3 months, the temperament of an infant can be impacted by the conflict that's going on in the home. And so being able to really communicate openly and often with your partner is really, really important. And to also remember that communication isn't just about words, but also your attitude, right? So if your partner says, can you, fold the laundry, and you say, yeah, sure, it's one way of communicating it. But if they ask you to fold the laundry and you're like, oh, again, okay, all right, fine, I'll do it. So your partner might turn around and say, no, thanks. You know what? I'll do it myself. I don't need you to do it. I don't need the huffing and puffing. I mean, you see how your attitude really impacts your behavior and how it comes across. Like, you want your partner to appreciate the fact that you're about to fold clothes, but the way that you agree to do it makes them resent even asking. And the fact that they have to even ask you and you can't even tell that the clothes need to be folded. I mean, it kind of builds up, right? And so really to be aware of how we're communicating. And I say this, but then I also want you to remember that when you're a new parent, and parents can appreciate this, all of this stuff is forgotten because you lack sleep. You're just exhausted, and no one can really prepare you for the exhaustion that comes with bringing a baby home. I um, I think it was 5 years ago. I actually had a student in my class, and she said she was a night nanny. It was the first time I'd ever heard of it, and she said that she would go to a couple's house at 8 o'clock at night, and she would stay with the infant until 6 in the morning. And so when the baby got up at night, she was responsible for taking care of the baby so that the parents could get their sleep because they were going to work. And I thought, that is amazing. But you have to be able to afford that. You have to have the resources to be able to, pay for that, right? But really, when we think about the lack of sleep that new parents are experiencing, then saying, you have to be mindful of your communication. It's difficult, it's not easy. And so it really is about trial and error, and then expectations. So communication is important, but so are expectations, and recognizing that you have expectations, even if you think, what, I don't have any expectations. We're both doing this together. It's our first time. You have these maybe unconscious expectations. And so to recognize them and to talk about them with your partner is really important. To be kind to yourself is really important when it comes to expectations. If you don't do something the way you thought you would do it, it's okay. When you see those, I think it's like Love's diaper commercials where, the first child, the mom is looking for a babysitter with a PhD in child development. And then it shows like the second child and the babysitter is coming to the door. I don't know, maybe doesn't resemble who the first, the impression that you have for an ideal babysitter. And, we laugh at that and it's funny, but it's a reality. I mean, the initial child is where parents are taking on a lot of new experiences and have these high expectations for themselves. So be kind to yourself, be kind to your partner and your friends and family who are trying to support you in terms of your expectations. And remember, you don't want to have high expectations, but it's important to have expectations, to kind of set standards for yourself, and to try to support your partner and be supportive of yourself. I love the social media clips where moms and dads talk about things that they wish someone had told them. They wish someone had told them when they were becoming parents. I think that peer relationship with other parents becomes so crucial because it really validates your experiences. It tells you you're okay and you're not doing anything wrong, and really taking on a trial and error kind of perspective when it comes to how you do things with your child as a couple. We do not underestimate how much additional surface area there is for conflict when you have a child. Before, as a couple, you probably never fought over covering your baby with a blanket because it was windy outside, but then that might become a conversation that creates some tension because you think the wind is too harsh and your partner thinks, no, the child needs to be exposed to this weather. And then it just like starts a huge conflict and an argument, and it's over a blanket over a child. So these kinds of realities are daily occurring for new parents. And so to be okay with saying, what, let's take the blanket off, or let's put the blanket on and see if they get too hot, then we'll take it off. Trial and error, value each other, communicate with each other. These are really, really important skill sets to have as new parents. And that kind of wraps me up. I think that that is my time.
That was great. That was great. No, Dr. Roy, thank you so much for sharing all that you did. I know you had asked for a 5-minute warning, but you were so perfectly wrapping things up. I felt like it was great. So no, but in all seriousness, thank you for sharing your expertise. One of the questions you had mentioned, you used the term maternal gatekeeping, and I think that's what this first question is kind of getting at.
Yeah.
And the question is, do you have advice for how a father might be able to be more engaged when mom is being overprotective of her role? So I think that's kind of what you were referring to with the maternal gatekeeping point.
Yes, yes. So I think that it's interesting because oftentimes we see moms wanting support, and then when dads are wanting to give support, then it gets, well, you're not doing things right, right? And so it's difficult to tell the father how to do things without listening to what the mom needs. And so for example, the mom might really struggle at certain periods with certain tasks, and dad doesn't want to help. But then when maybe the child is calm and it's a feeding time, dad wants to get involved. And so it really becomes communicating with your partner to say, hey, I see what you're doing and you're doing great. You're an amazing mom, but I really want to support. And so what do you need from me, and how can I be more involved in caring for our child? And so communicating, like asking. And if the partner is saying there's nothing you can do, then maybe waiting and saying, okay, if there's nothing you do, I would like to do something. So can I take the baby for a walk? Can I, and it's hard to say, like, you have to ask permission, but what we find is that when dads are engaged, mothers' relationship satisfaction and quality increases.
Mm.
And I've worked with dads who say, the best thing I could have done for my relationship is become more involved. And so sometimes if there's been conflict and resentment and dad is trying to be involved, you kind of have to work through the past relationship stuff before you jump in. I myself will say, the first time my husband changed a diaper, I stopped him and I was like, that's not how you do it. This is like, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I know all the research. I know I shouldn't stop him, but that's just, something that happens to us. And so, it's not a conversation to just have with one partner. Both partners need to be involved in the conversation, and dad needs to really share that he wants and values his role as a dad and wants to know how he can best support. Sometimes it's difficult, especially if mom is home and dad is working, for dad to come home, everything's kind of been taken care of, and to just jump and play with the child and not appreciate what mom's done all day. So, be more recognizing of what your partner is doing at home or has done all day, and then saying, how can I give you a break? And maybe taking care of your child when mom wants to take a nap or go out or do something. But again, it's really a conversation that the couple needs to have with each other. And don't guess at what your partner needs. Really talk to them about it and ask them.
No, that's great. Wow, that's really helpful. And there's, obviously a number of insights in what you shared, but one of the things that stuck out to me was the idea that it's not just enough to say, well, I want to help, I want to be engaged, right? It's more about looking for and communicating about what are the ways in which a mom is actually in need of that help or in need of that assistance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, right. It's easy to be around for the easy stuff, right?
Yeah.
Terrific. We have another question that was asked, and it says, do you have tips for navigating parenting when your partner has children from a previous relationship?
Okay, so that kind of depends on the amount of connection you have with those children. So are the children living with you? Are the children in another home? Is it, what kind of a situation is it? Because what we do know is that, parenting is a kind of a learned behavior. And so if your partner has parented a certain way in a different family, and then when they come and you're expecting them to be quite different in terms of how engaged and involved they are, you're kind of setting yourself up with false expectations unless you can communicate, how did they feel that they, let's go to maternal gatekeeping. Maybe the partner feels like in their other union, they weren't allowed to do certain things and they really wanted to expose their children to certain sports or whatever, I don't know. But communicating, like, what do you need as a dad? What can I provide? Or how can we make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to our parenting? Parenting values and beliefs are learned. And especially in periods of crisis, we go back to what we learned from our families of origin. And so it takes a lot of effort to shift and change our parenting behaviors. So, that's kind of a loaded question to say, how to navigate. It's about communication. I don't know the age of the other children. I don't know what the relationship is like. I think it's easy to say that co-parenting is essential and important. And if you are, a step parent, to really talk to your partner about your role and how they see you playing that role, not overstepping your boundaries with the other parent, because that can go down, a slippery slope with lots of disrespect and things like that. And so to navigate any kind of relationship with, families that are kind of blended is really, it's really important to communicate, what do you see as my role? What are the expectations you have for me? How do I feel valued as a co-parent when the children come to our home? And really just setting some boundaries and having open communication is key.
Yeah, I can imagine that each of those scenarios is somewhat unique, right? Even though there may be some sort of consistent challenges,
Mm,
everyone's experience with it in a prior relationship, in a prior family, is going to bring something a little bit different to that.
yes.
Terrific. That was helpful. Thank you. Uh, Someone asked, and you spoke to some of these things, so I don't know how specifically you want to address this, but the question asks, what are the biggest third rail issues for new parents, and how do we avoid them? So, I think kind of getting at what are the biggest danger zones when you're transitioning into parenthood.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the generally speaking, and we've all been there. You have these expectations for yourself. I've been in places where people will be like, oh gosh, that kid has an iPad. I will never give my children iPads. I will never let my children be in front. You have all these things that you think you're going to do, or you set yourself up and say, I'm going to breastfeed because breast milk is the best thing for my child. And I will never, do this. I will never do that. And then you have a child and you think, my kid's not latching on. I can't breastfeed. That is devastating. And so really what we find, parents set themselves up by having these extreme expectations of themselves and their partners. I laugh because we often think, and in these conversations, you have conversations with your friends, you think, oh, once we have a kid, my partner is going to change and he or she is going to do this and that. And it's like, people won't change. The additional stress will actually cause them to revert back to old learned behaviors. So really being open to saying, okay, this is what my expectations are, but if this doesn't happen, how can we work together to adjust? The issue with the transition to parenthood is, as prepared as you think you are, you just never know what's going to happen. You don't know what your baby's temperament is going to be like. You've heard people say, if I had my second baby in the place of my first baby, I wouldn't have had another one, because you can have the same parents and infants are just super different, and so you don't know what you're going to get. I know that kind of sounds cliche, but you don't know what the baby's temperament is going to be like. And you really just have to use that trial and error. We know that violated expectations. So if you have these set expectations for yourself and your family, and then those are like unmet, they go unmet, that really impacts your relationship, and it doesn't just have to be your partner, it could be your other support systems. When you think about it, there's so many pieces to this transition. So from your pregnancy plan to bringing your baby home, there's so many things that could go off course for you. And so just having that mentality that I'm going to go with the flow, this is trial and error, we're going to figure it out, is really, really important. And I said that I've been studying this stuff for almost 2 decades now. And when I had my first child, she was very attached. Like, she needed to be held to fall asleep. She needed like touch to fall asleep. And so we co-slept with her. And then my second child, I mean, I personally thought something was wrong with her, because the closer I would get to her, she would cry and she just wanted to be in her crib alone. And we thought, what is wrong? Because the other child never slept in her crib. And so you just really don't know what's going to happen with your infant, what they're going to need from you. And because they're so dependent, you really need to follow their cues. And so you might have all these expectations of what this child is going to be like, and it's going to be different. The one thing I will tell you that I tell all new parents is, don't waste your money on all the bells and whistles and all those crazy things that are out there. Really, diapers, you might need formula or a breast pump, lots of onesies, but all these gadgets of, this will rock your baby, this will swing your baby, your baby needs touch and to be held and rocked by you, and especially those first few months. So don't, when you're making a list of things that you want and need, be mindful of that. Diapers can be very expensive, and don't get a whole bunch of the same size, because they will grow and develop and you'll need different sizes. So I always tell parents that you should be mindful when it comes to spending a lot of money on gadgets and things. Marketing has gotten very creative in telling you what you will need to have a great baby, but really you don't need all that stuff.
Well, yeah, that's a really good point, right? Because you're sort of describing this idea of, as a new parent, you have these expectations, and you want to create this positive experience, right? I mean, the positive environment, positive relationships, and I think what you're saying, what's really important about what you're saying is, it's not that you don't want to be caring about that. Of course, you want to be mindful, you want to be thoughtful about it, but recognizing that what that is may not be the same as what you thought it was going to be, right? Or what your
Exactly.
expectation was about that.
Yes. And I think that one of the errors that we make as new parents is that we expect people to change. And the reality is, what worked for you as a couple is probably going to be what you will have. And what becomes even more important to the foundation of your relationship is that communication piece, being able to share openly and honestly how you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and what you need from your partner.
I want to pick up on that, because there was another question, and I was actually going to bring it up a little bit later, but it ties into what you're saying now. So let me ask it. Somebody asked, I know that you talk about the importance of talking with your partner, but my husband avoids these conversations when they're about our children. How do I get him to engage on these?
Okay.
I don't know if you have an answer to that, because that's, but
Yeah.
that's
I think that, well, we know that for some men, the stress of dealing with some of the topics can create a physiological reaction. And so they will push back and don't want to talk about it. So when you talk about it is important. Don't try to bring up the subject after a child has misbehaved or is in the middle of having a tantrum. Don't turn to your partner and be like, I told you not to do this, right? So I think that these types of discussions need to take place prior to things happening. And if you're in a place right now where things have escalated and your partner doesn't want to have these conversations, then I would seek support and find resources. I think, we are in a society where women can often easily find connections with other mothers, but we don't nurture the peer support with men. And one of the things I've learned in evaluating fatherhood programs is that men value that. They value the ability to sit with other men and talk freely without judgment about their struggles. And I think for a lot of men, they haven't seen the engaged father that they're expected to be. And so how do we support them in being more involved? Sometimes dads might be the good cop or the bad cop in the situation, and we really have to be on the same page, because children are brilliant. They will learn who to go to, who they can get get away with stuff. And so parents just need to be consistent and on the same page. And if you feel like there isn't an opportunity to sit and talk to your partner, one of the things that you need to remind them about is that fathers are really, really important in the lives of their children. And so being an engaged and involved father is impactful. And so let's value that. And, I appreciate you. And if we can't have these conversations, maybe we can find someone who can support us and facilitate these conversations.
Well, I found it helpful. I hope the person who asked the question found that helpful as well.
I hope so too.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, there are the fathers face unique challenges, right? And it's a different experience than mothers. You've been talking, sort of generally about parenthood and the transition to parenthood. One of the questions that was asked was, are there different challenges in transitioning to parenthood for same-sex couples, same-sex parents? And I don't know if that's within your scope of research or not, but
well, I can speak to, it's not my area of expertise, but I can speak to the fact that we see common stressors when we think about, each individual partner and the experiences that they have, their ability to communicate their expectations. We actually see the same kinds of shifts in division of roles and division of labor, even among same-sex couples. Someone feels like they're doing too much, and someone feels like, their partner's not doing enough. And so we see that. The additional stressor that we see for same-sex parents is their experiences with their community. And so if they are feeling stressed by, interactions that they're having, maybe, they go into a community setting and people aren't accepting of their family. So there's additional stressors. And again, it comes down to having support systems, ensuring that you surround yourself with people who respect and value your role as parents. And so we often find the same kinds of outcomes, but additional stressors. And those additional stressors are also common for multiracial couples who get the pushback from members of the community or society who aren't accepting of their relationships. But in terms of like couples conflict and situations like that, it's very common, very similar.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can see too where, sort of the nature of the community and the extent to which there's already sort of existing support or not probably goes a long way towards impacting how similar or different some of those experiences are, or how many additional challenges a single couple would face. Yeah. Okay. So one last question that someone asked, this has been great. And so thank you for everything. A number of comments too are coming to me that just say, thank you. This is a great webinar. So I'm going to share that with you now. Right. So that's great. But the last question I want to ask is, do you have any book recommendations for folks who are watching about the transition to parenthood?
Well, there's a lot of, I think, child development books that, not off the top of my head. I want to tell you about my textbook, but it's a textbook. It's not like a lay audience. I think one of the books that is foundational to a lot of this work that we've been doing is the Cowan and Cowan Partners to Parents. I think it's when partners become parents. They did a 7-year study, and a lot of what they found following these couples, and really they looked at why, I didn't share this, but a lot of couples get divorced. And not a lot of couples get divorced, but when couples are getting divorced in those first 7 years, they talk a lot about the transition to parenthood and how they didn't feel supported. And so when they did this study, you'll see examples in their work that have been the foundation for a lot of the work that we've been doing for decades now. And that's a really easy to read kind of a book. I would focus a lot on the attachment, the love languages, because it's not necessarily, there's a ton of books that talk about the biology of parenting, and they're important, but really it's about your relationship and your relationship with yourself. Sometimes I talk to parents about reparenting yourself. I used to facilitate a rediscover parenting program with women who had experienced domestic violence, and they had a lot of struggles parenting their young children, because of the way that they were parented, and then that behavior that they learned from their parents. And so it's not just a transition to parenthood literature that you need to focus on. It's about relationships and parenting and brain development. So I can't give you just one book to look at. I think it really depends on where you are. I would recommend, taking the love languages test. It's easily accessible, knowing what your love language is, knowing your partner's love language, and really focusing on your communication styles with your partner.
One of the things you have hit several times, which just strikes me as so important, is how your ability as an individual to transition to successful parenting, let's say, for lack of a better term, successful, but right, is just tied so closely to your relationship. It's tied so closely to your, and so it's like working on that is about working on your transition.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's interesting is that thank you, Karen, for sharing that when partners become parents, the Cowan and Cowan book. What's interesting is that sometimes in couples, we find that, dad is super involved and mom is still not happy. And it has nothing to do with dad, but it has to do with her own feelings of being overwhelmed and anxiety. And it's not anything that he could do different, right? And the same for dads who don't want to be engaged, right? It's nothing that mom can do. But I think that would hold true for same-sex couples too. It's really about the individual and how prepared they are. When we talk about relationships, one person can't make the relationship work. Both individuals have to be invested. And so really it's like you said, it's a lot about the individual and then connecting with the partner.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all that you have with us today. I did want to mention to folks watching that any resources that Dr. Roy mentioned during her talk, we'll make sure when the recording of the video is posted that we'll have those links attached to that. So we did put them in the chat, but we'll also have them up, and you all will receive an email when the webinar is posted on our YouTube page. So, but with that, my sincere thanks to you, Dr. Roy, for sharing your expertise with all of us today. My thanks as well to everyone who joined us and participated in today's webinar hosted by the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations at Cal State San Bernardino. At the ICDFR, we've been providing guidance for parents and families based on science and best practice since 2002. And if you'd like to hear more from us or learn more about some of our projects, please like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You can visit our YouTube page where this webinar and all of our previous webinars are posted and available. And of course, you can learn more about our projects by visiting the ICDFR page on the CSUSB website, which is csusb.edu/ICDFR. So with that, again, my thanks to Dr. Roy, my thanks to all of you. Have a wonderful day and be well.
Thank you. Bye.